Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be a fairly quick lesson in which we are going to discuss a few different points of failure to keep in mind when troubleshooting point-to-site VPN connections. In this lesson, we will start off with a quick discussion of a few different common points of point-to-site VPN connection failures, and then we will talk about what diagnostic logs are available to help troubleshoot point-to-site VPN issues on both the Azure side and also client side, specifically focusing on the Azure VPN client. Jumping on into it, let's start with a few separate common points of point-to-site VPN failure that you should be aware of when troubleshooting it. From a high-level perspective, just how we have multiple tunnel types and authentication methods, the exact cause of failure can depend on the specific authentication method we're working with. For the scope of this course and the exam, we are not going to go into a deep dive into each authentication method, but there are a couple specific points that I want to bring up. The first item to troubleshoot is to make sure that your protocol, authentication method, and your operating system are all compatible with each other. From our previous lesson on tunnel types and authentication methods, we saw that different tunnel types worked and didn't work with different authentication methods, and the same was true for different operating systems it either did or did not support. Also, as a previous review, we also learned that from a wide compatibility perspective, the OpenVPN tunnel type or protocol by far has the widest compatibility with all the different operating systems and is also most compatible with our different authentication methods as well. Next, I want to focus on a specific scenario that we hinted at earlier in this section in the interaction between point-to-site VPN configurations and peered virtual networks. In this scenario, we have an existing point-to-site VPN configuration already running in which we have one or more endpoints connected to some sort of a network, maybe a hub network like you see in the bottom right of our diagram. After our point-to-site VPN connection is already running, we afterwards then peer a new network to our centralized hub network like you see on the right side. Our endpoints will be unable to see or communicate with our newly peered network unless we take additional action. In this scenario, we must then re-download our VPN configuration to all of our endpoints before those endpoints are able to view or exchange private network traffic with our newly added peered network. So again, here the order is very important. We have an existing point-to-site VPN connection. We add a new peered network. We must then re-download our VPN configuration to our endpoints before they can see the newly added network. Moving on, let's talk about diagnostic logs to figure out what exactly is happening that should not be happening. Two areas we're going to focus on, the Azure side and the client side. From the Azure side, this is going to be a little bit of review on our troubleshooting site-to-site VPN connectivity, in which we have another log type called P2S diagnostic log, which, not surprisingly, is used for diagnosing issues with your point-to-site VPN connection. The P2S diagnostic log is in the exact same log locations as our other VPN gateway logs we talked about in the previous section, with the caveat that our P2S diagnostic logs is only able to capture traffic for OpenVPN and IKE version 2 only. The other diagnostic log item that we want to focus on is from a client side, is how to diagnose issues with the Azure VPN client, which is required for Azure AD authentication. And really all that we need to know is that when working with Azure VPN client on the client side, we can use the diagnose function built into that application, which can run a wide variety of diagnostics, such as verifying that internet access works, making sure your client credentials are working correctly, and also making sure that our remote VPN server is resolvable and also reachable. With that, that's going to conclude our fairly quick overview of relevant points to keep in mind when troubleshooting point-to-site VPN connectivity. Let's review our key takeaways before we move on. First point we covered is that when troubleshooting connectivity is that we need to make sure that our tunnel type is compatible with our authentication method and with our operating system as well. In other words, we must match our protocol and authentication method and our operating system for full compatibility, from which we also learned that of the different tunnel types available, OpenVPN is by far the most compatible. We also discussed interactions between network peering and point-to-site VPN configurations, in which for already existing point-to-site VPN connections, when you add or peer a new network to some sort of a hub network, that newly added network is not visible by default, in which case you must then re-download your point-to-site VPN configuration to all of your endpoints so those endpoints will be able to see the newly added peered network. And then we finished up by talking about logging, working with point-to-site VPN, in which we learned from the Azure side, we can work with the P2S diagnostic log type. And also in the specific scenarios of working with the Azure VPN client, there are a number of diagnostics on client side that can be used to troubleshoot different connectivity issues. That's going to go ahead and wrap this lesson up. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one.